Hello, I'm Keith, and I want to give my account of a miraculous healing that I experienced when I was just a boy. When I was a young man, about 5 or 6 years old, uh, my parents got me a bicycle, and they taught me how to ride it and helped me along with the training wheels and everything. And I was pretty quick to learn because I guess I was just really you know, liking the idea of knowing how to ride, so I caught on relatively quickly. Uh, I remember that much about it, that I did catch on real quick. And my dad he was a mechanic, and him being a young man himself, he had he had what he called a stock car that he raced it on an oval track. It was one of those tracks that uh, it was elevated on each end, so that as the car went around the oval track, it went uphill and then back downhill 2 times during the large oval. In any case, the reason I mentioned the car is because I remember my dad would work on it in the backyard after work. He'd come home and do different things to the car, getting it ready for the race on the weekend. And we had a neighbor moved in across the street from us, and I came over and introduced himself to my dad. And my dad was working on that uh, car. I still remember the written on the side of the name of the car. It was called the Bucket of Bolts. It was a kind of a raggedy looking thing, but in those days, it's pretty much was just a shell of a car. It had some bars in it to protect you in case you turned it, rolled it over, keeping it from collapsing. But anyway, the only reason I say about the car or the neighbor is because that this neighbor, uh, he uh, he came over and introduced himself to my dad, and I guess days and weeks must have gone by, and uh, this this man introduced my dad to the church that he was going to. He invited him to church, and my dad agreed to go. And anyway, uh, before long, well, my dad had he had become a um, I guess he was listening to the preaching, and things were resonating with him. And it wasn't too long before my dad, had made a commitment to Christ, and he was a new believer. And being a new Christian and all, this this fella had reached out to him, and through the man, well, that's how my dad got into church. Before that, the only thing that my dad really told me, that as far as from his family was concerned with church, was the school that he went to was a church school, and it was one of those churches that uh, I don't know a whole lot about it, but from what he said, they didn't really encourage a lot of questions and things about you know the Bible or anything like that. But they kept well, they pretty much kept getting aggravated him because he was asking a lot of questions, and he said they finally ended up kicking him out of the school because they just thought he was asking too many questions. He said he was sincere. He said they may have thought I was just being a smart aleck. He said, but I really wasn't. He said I was just curious. But the only reason I mention all of that is because my dad he was a good man. He wasn't a bad guy. You hear different people's stories about their father being you know angry and coming home and being mean and them being afraid. My dad wasn't like that at all. He was a good guy. He was just working hard, supporting his family, and he had a hobby racing a car. And um, I just don't remember anything bad about him at all. But what happened was, after a short time after I learned to ride that bicycle, that I started. Our hill. There was a hill where we lived. We lived at the top of a hill, and it was a paved street. And I was riding along with some other kids, and I happened to notice, some of the other kids, they'd been riding longer than I had, and one of them was riding down that hill, and he wasn't holding on to the handlebars, and that just impressed me. And I was just thinking, well, if he can do it, I can too. But honestly, the first time I tried it, I ended up crashing. The neighbor said when my head hit the ground, it sounded like a shotgun went off or something. It made a whole lot of noise, and I don't remember the moment that I was hit, when my head hit the ground. But um, And I guess part of this, the picture that I remember them carrying me in was probably my mother telling me about it, because I don't see how I could have really remembered that because I was unconscious apparently when they picked me up. And my mother was actually across the street at the neighbor's house, the one that had, where the dad had came over and introduced himself to my dad and got him, going to church. My mom had become friends with his wife, so she was over there visiting the lady. Her name was Edith. And they carried me in, and the story that I remember hearing about that was that my mother, she was upset when they carried me in because I couldn't talk any sense, and she was asking me questions. And of course, when I couldn't answer it, it really scared her. And she finally threatened me. She said, "Look, if you don't answer me, I'm going to slap you." I'm sure she was not trying to be mean. She was just scared. She didn't know any other way, and she knew that should get a response out of me, and I think it would have. But apparently, I just wasn't able to answer. And when that happened, it really set her. I mean, it scared her bad. And so what they ended up doing, parts of this I remember. They took me to the doctor and they X-rayed my head, and they showed the X-rays to my parents, and they told my parents that this boy he's got brain injury. He says that it's very serious. And what they told my parents was that if he lives, he'll be in a vegetable state. Now, I don't know really how they could have known that. Apparently, they'd seen a lot of X-rays and been exposed to that kind of thing. But my parents believed them, and well, I say they believed them. I don't know what else they could have done because they were young and they, just hadn't been around anything like that before. But this part I do remember. I remember being in our house. I was in the bed, and someone came over, a man that I guess he knew my parents, and I don't know why he came over, but I guess he was visiting him. It was almost like he had brought something over there. But I remember I didn't realize the severity of it. I had become conscious, later, obviously. But when I tried to stand up and get out of the bed, I'd just fall to the floor. I just couldn't balance. I couldn't stand up. And at the young age I didn't realize, that was a scary thing. To me, it was just like, watch this. And I tried to get up, and I couldn't. And my mom came and scolded me. She said, "Stay in the bed. Don't do that. You can hurt yourself worse." And my hearing was distorted too. I couldn't hear well. And then my stomach was nauseated. I couldn't hold food down. I remember those things. That I do remember. But this is the other thing I remember. Now, this part I don't remember what they told my parents because I probably wasn't there. But this preacher guy, I think he was a preacher, like maybe a fill-in or something. I'm really not sure, but he lived across the street from us. But what he did is he came over and talked to my dad. He said, I'm kind of getting ahead of the story a little bit. The doctors somehow had set up, we lived in Sikeston, Missouri, and it's just a small town in Missouri, and they had me set up for an appointment in St. Louis to go to St. Louis Hospital. I guess it was a children's hospital. I really don't know. I do know they had a children's ward because they watched me. They put me in observation. But what happened was they scheduled me. They were supposed to cut my head open and try to repair the damage to my brain. I don't know exactly how that works, but they were going to open my head up and try to save my life, is what the story goes. And so this is the part. Okay, my dad said that this preacher came across the street and said, "Brother Davis says, I don't want you to be worried." He says he had like four. I can't remember if it was four other preachers or five other preachers, but it was the number 4 or 5 anyway. We got several preachers going to be praying for that boy. And he says, we're believing God that when you get there, he's going to be healed. And of course, my dad hadn't had any experience with anything like that before that I know of. But they did put me in a car, and this is the part that I remember and I'll never forget. I was in the back seat of that car laying down asleep on the trip from Sikeston, Missouri to St. Louis, Missouri. And I guess it was somewhere in the outskirts, because when I sat up in that car, it's like we were in the outskirts of the big city. And if you've ever been in the big city, you know basically what that looks like. And I sat up, and I was perfectly normal from that moment. The moment that I sat up in the back of that car, I remember I was thirsty, and I said, "I want a Pepsi." I guess that was my favorite drink at the time, but that's what I did. I said, "I want a Pepsi." And you know what? They took me on to that hospital, and I remember a couple of doctors, feeling all over my head, asking where I'd bumped my head, and they ended up putting me in this little bed in a, I guess it's a ward. It was a kind of a big room. It had a bunch of beds in it. And to be honest, I don't remember seeing anybody else in there. I'm talking about any other children. But I just remember I was bored silly. But I was totally normal. My parents even came back and brought me some comic books. I don't remember if I stayed there 2 days or maybe just one long day and it seemed like forever. I don't know. But I remember I was pretty bored. And I was normal, though. They never did, they released me. They never did find anything wrong with me after that. So, you know what? To me, that was an early age to start out and seeing, a miraculous healing. And, it's just stuck with me. And it's helped me to have, a pretty good amount of faith as far as asking for people to be healed. And, I didn't have any faith as a kid. I just, I didn't know anything. But I definitely remember the result of that is having people pray for me. And I'm really thankful for that. I just don't really believe I'd be standing here today, if that hadn't happened. And I'm really thankful for it. And I just really feel compelled to share that story. And that's why I'm making this video. So that's my humble story of how it happened, way back when I was, about 5 years old. And I'm in my 60s now. So that was quite a while back. So anyway, I just praise God for it. And, I'd like to encourage anybody, keep the faith. If you get in a tight spot, God does hear prayer. He answers prayer. I don't understand everything about it, but I do know He healed me. And I just praise God for it. Thank you.